And now, the survival show that once survived watching A Christmas Story 10 times in a row without shooting its own eye out. In this episode, we're joined by firearms trainer and prepper, Salvatore. He's going to share with us his thoughts on handguns versus carbines and the things you should be putting in your pocket every day before you leave the house. Howdy and welcome to the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 235. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Salvatore, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole, man.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I follow your show. Great show. So very pleased to be a guest and share some knowledge like we try to do in the community for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, it's going to be a gun show, and everybody loves a gun show.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you are from reflexhandgun.com. Before we get into that, though, you're also a prepper. So let's start there. How did you get into preparedness?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, preparedness and guns are seamlessly integrated, and I find more preppers in the prepper community are gun people than vice versa. Right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of serious firearms people who, have maybe 2 days worth of food in the house. and I just see a breakdown there, obviously. So carrying a concealed handgun, which is my particular specialty as an instructor, as a writer, most of my focus is on that. That is part of being prepared for your everyday life. We know bad things can happen right here and now. Certainly after any sort of without rule of law or grid down scenario, we know those things would just be escalated. So in my mind, preparedness runs that whole gamut. So I'm pleased to see that, again, most preppers are more squared away in both of those worlds. I'd like to see more and more of our firearms people come over to being a little bit more prepared to be self-sufficient in the wake of an event.
Yeah, it's always been funny when I talk to friends that are strictly in the firearms community and don't have that crossover in the preparedness. And sometimes they joke about preppers or they make disparaging remarks. And I ask them, why do you carry a gun? And like, well, bad things happen. And it's like, so you don't think preparing in a more holistic way makes sense? And it's at some point, usually the light comes on with them with that, or sometimes it doesn't. How do you handle that conversation? Do you try to persuade people who are just in the gun community to go headlong into preparedness too? Yeah,
absolutely. I do. I think a lot of it comes off of a stigma. We can all think of things like shows like Doomsday Preppers and all that sort of thing, where that kind of popular media will portray preppers as the tinfoil hat types, with bomb shelters and all of this kind of stuff. So that may give it a stigma. So I usually, the events that go on now make the conversation easier because we see in the wake of hurricanes and wildfires and all of this, I will approach it with, what have you caught in that situation? It doesn't have to be a Mad Max post-apocalyptic scenario. What have you cut off for 2 weeks, like a Hurricane Katrina kind of situation, and you have only 2 days worth of food in the house, you can't purify water, etc. So it's actually become more, an easier conversation to have in the wake of these kind of things that we see. So usually when you're dealing with somebody who is carrying a firearm to begin with, their mindset to some extent is there anyway. So it's probably a little bit easier just to breach that conversation than, somebody who doesn't even have a gun in the house, obviously.
Yeah. So did you become a gun guy first or a prepper that got into guns? Which way did that shake out for you?
Yeah, I would have to say I was definitely a firearms guy real early on. I grew up with a father who was a firearms instructor as part of his job.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's an old timer gun guy now, back when law enforcement was all revolvers, that sort of thing. And, he's stayed on top of it since. And that got me into it from a very early age. There's a big advantage there for people who do start very early. Although if you start as an adult, I find people who do start as an adult, they really get into the novelty of it and really enjoy it. So for myself, though, it's been a lifelong thing. But I must say that early on, I was thinking of being prepared in terms of facing grid down scenarios before it was really a thing. I can think back to when I was, even in my early teens. I lived in the South at the time, and we had a hurricane rolling in, and I had a backpack full of stuff, and I had my rifle ready to go in case everything flooded out and the house blew away and there was looters running everywhere. Well, the hurricane came and went, and none of that stuff happened anyway. There was just a lot of cleaning up, branches that came down. But, that was before really prepping was a thing. So I think if you have the mindset of self-sufficiency, you're inevitably going to go into preparedness to one extent or another.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And so did your dad get you into firearms? Was it just something you grew up?
I grew up with it. He was heavily into it. And myself, a couple of my siblings as well, are into firearms to a greater or lesser extent. But like anything else, if you're truly passionate about something, that comes from the individual. The early start with it helps immensely, especially an early start with somebody who really knows what they're doing, not just, Uncle Bob taught me to shoot, the 22, you know what I mean? So getting a good start really helps. But when you become an adult yourself and decide you're passionate about something like I have, and I work to educate the population that now is coming into concealed carry. I mean, at this point, I can't even keep up with it. It changes so often. The last time I read was closing in on 16 million carry permits issued in the country. And obviously, this is something in the past decade.
Right.
So it's been in that period of time that I've gone into being an instructor myself, not only teaching new people how to shoot, but the work I do with writing and all of that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Did you have a career before, or did you just go straight into it?
It's not my full-time career. I actually have a boring day job, like so many do. But it's been the thing I do on the side as a passion.
So iTrade, as you probably know, is really big on focusing on an 80% prepping strategy. That is to say, we focus mostly on doing the 80% of things in preparedness that make you safer today and will get you through the crazy stuff down the road. And, many of us focus on our carbines. I'm a huge lover of the AR-15 and pretty much most black rifles. I'm an equal opportunity fondler. And there's this old, possibly overused expression that you use your handgun to fight your way to your rifle. So how does focusing more on a handgun make more sense starting with the now and working our way towards a grid down situation, we'll say?
Yeah, absolutely. So before we even go into it, let me first say that I'm not in any way opposed to acquiring and training extensively with long guns. Whether I'm an AR-15 guy myself, if that's your preference, or perhaps, shotguns, whatever the case may be. Obviously, we know that the long gun ballistically, as far as performance, is vastly superior.
Right.
So if you're not squared away with a dedicated defensive long gun, I think you have a serious hole in your preps. So with that said, the problem I find is that, and again, not just among preppers, among the whole firearms community, is that there tends to be almost an unrealistic focus on the long gun. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons for that is because long guns are fun.
Right.
You can go and, I can tell you as an instructor, I can take somebody who's never fired a gun before, and within 2 hours of training, they can be running an AR-15 with some confidence, making hits at 50 yards, etc., something that would take 3 months of training with a handgun for that same individual to do. So we see a lot of focus on the long gun because people take a tactical carbine class and they build a lot of confidence with it, obviously, and they really enjoy shooting it. The issue is that currently, as an armed citizen, the handgun is the weapon that realistically you're going to use to defend yourself. Bringing up the example you said about the handgun is only what you use to fight your way to a rifle. If your rifle is in your gun safe and you're 20 miles away from home sitting in Wendy's and the event happens, I don't see how that's going to play out. Realistically, we don't see it play out even when people keep a trunk gun. An interesting example is, I hate to even bring it up, but this recent tragedy in the church in Texas, we had a very courageous armed citizen who went and neutralized that guy with a rifle. And he made the right decision. He was across the street from the event. So he grabbed the more effective weapon. So obviously there is a good argument for keeping a defensive long gun available. My argument is, though, that again, the handgun is the weapon you would have at ground zero, because in my opinion, the better outcome would have been if one of those people actually in the church was armed with a pistol. They could have shot that guy in the face when he came through the door.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really the idea behind the handgun. Realistically, is what you're going to fight the fight with. That's the gun you're going to have at ground zero. We can find a lot of examples of that. I'll give you a good one. There was a shootout that happened in Miami in 1986. Very, very infamous event. Probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with it. The FBI tried to apprehend a couple of notorious bank robbers. Within a few minutes, 7 FBI agents had been shot. 2 of them were killed. To make a long story short, that is the event that brought about the development of the .40 Smith & Wesson that the FBI adopted as their cartridge of choice, and then the mass migration, of course, of law enforcement to that cartridge. Now, the reason I bring up the event was one of those FBI agents, when he collided, there was a wreck with a bunch of cars before the shooting kicked off. He had a loaded shotgun in the seat of the car behind him. And when the fight started, he never got it into play. And that was behind him. So realistically, when rounds start being fired, when things go bad, people fight with the gun that's on them. And we can find a lot of experiences with that. So, if that happened and the gun was loaded right behind him in the vehicle, another shotgun came into play later in the event with a different agent. But this was also part of that event. It just goes to show you that things happen so quickly, and I think a lot of people forget about that. If you're in a public place, this idea now of having a trunk gun, we like that idea, and I'm not opposed to it at all. I think, if you can secure it so that it's secured, so it's not going to walk away with convenient theft, no problem. But I think people need to be realistic. If you're in the mall and something goes down, your chances of making it to your vehicle and coming back with your AR-15, first of all, that's going to be very hazardous for you, obviously, with responding law enforcement. But realistically, it's just not going to play out.
I think that's a really excellent point. And I think even Fairfault, who, for those that are familiar with him, made the point about handguns when he was in the financial collapse in Argentina. You're not out gardening. You're not out doing your daily life with a long gun. You're going to be doing that with a pistol at your side. Yeah, it's great if you're in a situation where you can get to your long gun, but by and large, you're not in the military. You're not an Israeli soldier who has to shower with your rifle. So you're not going to do it. Well, actually, I do know some people who shower with their pistol, but you're most likely it's going to be the pistol that you have with you. So yeah.
And you raise a great point. So we start talking about what would be different. I think the long gun is going to remain essentially what it is now. It's definitely something you want to have available in the home, perhaps for home defense. But to your point, exactly right. If you think about a long-term crisis that happens, inevitably you're going to be out and about. You're going to be doing manual labor. You're going to be doing work. You're not going to be tending your garden with an AR-15 on your back. You're just not. And I don't think that criminal opportunists are necessarily going to change that much. Things happen violently, unexpectedly, and quickly. And the weapon of immediate response to that kind of criminal attack remains the concealed carried handgun.
We'll be back after this quick break. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, access to monthly virtual and in-person meetups in some areas, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival all day long with like-minded people. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH. That's right, all the way back to the beginning, including one that was never aired. And those are just a few things you get with your membership when you sign up and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde by going to itrh.net. Again, that's itrh.net. let's get into gear. Gear's lots of fun, of course. What handguns do you recommend? Do you use? Let's go there.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think we can all acknowledge that if you carry any handgun, you are obviously better prepared than, 95, 98, name your number, right? Percent of the population. Even though we have 16 million carry permits at this time, any studies that I've seen where different groups have tried to assess how many of those people with permits are actually carrying on a daily basis, the statistics are depressingly small.
Right.
Depressingly small. So, and people are often restricted by their lifestyle. I'll admit that very often I carry a 5-shot revolver because I need deep concealment for certain social commitments, certain ways of dress, that sort of thing. That is not my carry gun of choice, but it's a lot more gun than no gun.
Right.
So I think currently, at least, people have to be realistic about that. Anything you carry is going to be a lot more gun than no gun. If you can do it, I think a lot of times people can carry more gun than they think if they get creative about it and put a little bit of work into it. As far as my personal preference, and again, it's personal preference, you can go around all day long with it. Much of the industry has moved this way, though, and I'm a believer in it. I like a double stack 9mm, either full service size or compact version thereof. That's what I like. Okay. Because most of them have compatibility with full size magazines, right? Even the compact versions. And that's what I personally like. You have the new fleet of single stack 9mm. They're a lot thinner, and it's still a pretty adequate gun if that's what you can pull off. So I think realistically now, just carry something hopefully that you're confident with, hopefully something you will never use, but hopefully you will have it if you need it.
So you mentioned putting work into it. Can you give us some examples of what you mean by
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people will just look at the size of the gun and they experiment with different holsters and say, there's no way I can pull this off. First of all, when we start, we're all very paranoid about printing. And, right, as well as I do that the general public is quite oblivious to it. Now, with that said, I believe concealed is concealed because, unfortunately, it's the people you don't want to know that are going to be the people who may notice that, right? But even carrying larger guns, it's a matter of you need to come to the conclusion that you do need to dress around it to some extent. That doesn't mean you have to dress like a hobo, right? But you do have to dress around it to some extent. Certain kind of clothes work for concealing a decent size handgun. Certain kinds do not. Obviously, certain carry positions work better for certain people. Appendix carry is a big thing now. I'm still strong side hip, because that's what works best for me. But if you dress around it, it's going to work. With that said, have the smaller gun available for those times where you simply cannot carry the bigger gun, because I'll tell you, a little 380 or a little 5-shot snubby revolver is, again, a lot more than having no gun.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that any of the tuckable holsters work well, or what do you personally use?
So, you know what I use when I have to tuck shirts in? So, if I have to go to some kind of formal occasion, what I have found works better for me, at least. Again, it's all very personal. So the tuckable holsters, I always find issues with those with actually getting the garment ripped out because they tend to pin it. I find the belly band is the answer to that because that is what the conclusion, the past year. So it's relatively new for me. If I have to carry a small gun under tucked in shirts, I've gone to the belly band. I never liked them. I always hated the idea of it. But what it does is it holds it to your body. And then if you have to rip out a tucked in shirt, you can do that much more easily, I find, than anything that actually still attaches to the belt. So that's my experience. Again, it just takes, we all inevitably accumulate that drawer full of holsters. It's just inevitable.
Yes. I think I have a box on my prepper gear shelf that is the part of the shelf where I just stick stuff that I can't figure out what to do. And of course, I'm like, eventually I'll put that up for sale or something. And I don't even know how many holsters I have in that stupid thing. But Yeah.
And, there's just no getting around it. There's a big push now. Obviously, I know a lot of people who are firearms trainers and people who write articles. And there's this big push. Oh, let's help people out so that they don't have to spend hundreds of dollars and try dozens of holsters that just don't work for them. You can help people out to some extent. You can kind of say, hey, this is what we universally acknowledge is bad. But honestly, it's so personal that I think inevitably anybody who is serious about carrying a gun on a daily basis, you're going to accumulate the drawer full of holsters. It's just going to happen. So just embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as training goes, where do you tend to have people begin with whether they're a new shooter or an old shooter, or do you find that there's a difference between the two and what you have to do as a trainer?
Yeah, that's interesting. I will say the same thing that pretty much anybody who does any amount of instruction will tell you. The best student you can have is a teenage girl. Because it's true, because they come for some reason, you throw the Y chromosome in there and they know everything already. It's true. You take a teenage girl and they've never handled a firearm before, and within a couple hours, they start to really run it and they're making hits. And you take a middle-aged guy, he grew up, this is my favorite, he grew up around guns.
Right.
See, right? So they all grow up around guns. That's like growing up, I guess, around a piano, and therefore you're Mozart. Yes. Right. So they grew up around guns, and no matter what you tell them, they already know how to shoot, so that's what I find. With that said, older folks, younger folks, it's really the mindset they walk in with. Do they want to come into it as, hey, I'm not experienced, that's what I'm here for, or did you grow up around guns and you know everything already? So either way, where I like to start people, obviously the most essential focus for new shooters and all shooters is safety, right? That's where it has to start. Usually when I train people, I try to do classroom time before they ever get to the range, where we go over that, handling the weapon safely, administrative handling of it safely. And that is the primary focus for new people. Beyond that, where people should go is start working. Now, if we're talking about defensive pistols, obviously, talking about using it from concealment, once they're safe with it, get them working with the gun from a holster. And when you throw concealment in, it makes things more complicated, but they have to get safe with that. Once they're safe with that, that's where, real training can begin. You start working on what are the essential elements. And, in terms of what should the focus of training be, I point people to the statistics of what tends to happen. The thing that I'm sure you've heard many times, right? Oh, it's going to be 3 yards in 3 seconds and 3 shots or less. Not really. Not really anymore. That's still very common. Cricket, the neighborhood crackhead, jumps you in an alley, and it's at 3 yards, and 3 shots are fired, whatever. But we see a whole lot more outliers anymore than we used to with that.
Really?
So the one thing that remains consistent, and I think if you do any amount of looking around at what real fights look like, is being able to get the gun out quickly and make an accurate first shot. That's where people need to focus their training. And that's just not as fun as, running around dressed in body armor. So, yeah, right.
Right.
So, but that honestly is the crux of it. And that's the first thing to really work to acquire, the first skill set with a concealed carry pistol.
Do you find either in the way you train or in what people want out of their training, preppers versus firearms people?
Yeah, there's a difference. I would say that the average person who is interested in firearms training today wants to get their concealed carry permit. That's the vast majority. They want to pass whatever qualification they need that the state mandates, and all states are different with that, to get that permit. Beyond that, a depressingly small percentage moves beyond that with training. And that's just a sad fact. The amount of actual enthusiasts out there who pursue serious training. And, for guys like me and you, it's hard to believe, right? Because we're enthusiasts. We're into it. Right. I bet within the past year, you've taken some kind of firearms training, and who knows how many times you've been at the range. I bet many of your listeners are the same way. The issue is that's the average person. Okay. It's hard to get them to move beyond just taking whatever that prerequisite for the permit is. preppers in general, again, you're dealing with people who realize that the world is a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
That already puts them ahead of the curve with that. I find that most people who are truly, preppers, people who have who store food and who store medical gear and who train with that stuff, they're more inclined then to go into the more advanced training. They're people who you will see taking tactical carbine classes, working with handguns. Even in that community, though, I find that you get more of a focus on, again, that post-collapse, what that's going to look like. Sometimes that blinds us to the fact that it is still Cricket, the neighborhood crackhead, who you might deal with now before any post-apocalyptic event happens.
Right. And that's excellent, because that does speak to that 80% rule mentioning earlier, as far as, and it's even going beyond guns. It's a wider scope of getting. And I find this to be more with new preppers who they're into the sexy of it. They're into the excitement of the new stuff, and they're focused on the grid down. And it's easy to leapfrog over hey, this is the stuff you need to be focusing on, because this is the stuff that's going to get you through tomorrow, as opposed to focusing on that 20%. Yeah, it could help you here and now, but really those are like high level skills that are for the zombie apocalypse or whatever. Yeah, I think that definitely speaks to it. I get it. I mean, I love going to carbine classes. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. But I also try to acknowledge and try to convince myself that I need to spend more time on handguns, because that's what I carry every day.
Right. And again, I'm not in any way opposed. My dream to see every law-abiding American citizen have an AR-15, and have body armor. And I think we both know that the world would be a different place if people just had the mindset to be squared away like that to begin with. We'd be dealing with a very different population. But, it's not realistic. As far as for those of us who do embrace that, like I said, you're not squared away if you don't have a good fighting long gun available. You're really not. So some time has to be spent on that. But I agree with you. That now is looking at things that could happen. Anything can happen. Right. We may find ourselves in need of that. But the reality of the here and now, and realistically, like back to your point about the social collapses that have happened, that we see happen in South America, et cetera, what it actually looks like is the gun you're still going to be carrying in the event when you're out and about is going to be preferably the gun hidden on your person, because the concealment alone gives you an advantage that even the long gun, as superior as it is, does not. When you carry a long gun exposed on your shoulder, everybody can see it. So the concealment factor, I would not be surprised in any sort of event that the concealment factor becomes even more important.
That's interesting. And while I am a huge proponent of open carry and constitutional carry being legal, I'm also, in a practical sense, and I think sometimes people have gotten confused when I say, yeah, I think open carry should be everywhere. It's silly that we don't have it. Why are people scared of seeing guns? But at the same time, I think from a practical sense, like a concealed handgun does often make more sense. That's a personal hypothesis. I don't have any real data to base that on. But yeah, I would totally agree with you. And to come to training itself, what do you find is most effective? Talking about the way gunfights used to happen and the way they're happening now, what do you find to be the most effective training methods and scenarios for people?
Again, if we go back to that standard that, I won't exactly call it a myth. It's not exactly a myth. Again, we've all heard it, 3 yards, 3 seconds, et cetera. That's still very common. But I think people need to move beyond that because we see more and more outlier events. A great example is the active shooter phenomenon. So, something like that is not going to be 3 yards, 3 seconds. We have seen actual events where either armed citizens or off-duty police officers or even on-duty police officers have made long shots with pistols. So beyond just the speed of the gun out of the concealed holster, I think something people need to focus on more is, can you reach out a little bit farther with that handgun? And that gets people uncomfortable. But with good training, even with smaller guns, you can pretty readily reach out to at least 50 yards, and then, good shooters can go out beyond that. But I think that's a pretty reasonable standard. It's all about a good grip on that pistol. It's about your trigger manipulation and sight picture. But start looking at, hey, with the gun I carry, can I reach out to 50 yards? And obviously, not to do torture at 50 yards like you were talking about, right? Shooting a 2-inch circle. No. But can you land it on a man-sized target anyway at 50 yards? And unfortunately, that's the world we live in now. And I think that's a skill set that people should try to obtain.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And to kind of mix it all up and give people a simple way to think about it, do you use personally a way that you break up your percentage of time, money, and energy between handguns and long guns?
Yeah, I'm about 90% handgun. Of course, I train a lot more than most people do. Even my only 10% on the long gun is about as much as the average person shoots in 10 years, right? So I think we have to approach it that way too. How much training are you doing? I would be comfortable suggesting to the average prepper or average person coming into the gun community 80-20. I really would. I would suggest that. It's almost back to your point of what's this general preparedness grid that we look at, the 80-20. We're going with statistically, hey, it is at least 80%. It's going to be the handgun that you use to defend yourself and defend your family. That's at least 80%. In fact, I've seen some studies done on that. And even in the home, the vast majority of home defense is done with a handgun. It's quicker to deploy. It's easier to store. Obviously, you can actually carry it even at home. Okay. I do more with the handgun myself because, again, that is my primary thing. Concealed carry, that's what I teach. That's what I do. But I think for most folks, 80-20 would be a good breakdown.
Okay, cool. And I think that also raises another thing, and you've talked about how much you shoot and everything else. What do you do personally as a trainer to keep up with your skills? Do you just get out on the range more? Do you go take classes? How do you do that?
I take classes as much as I can. You find that the top instructors out there, I'm a regional guy, but you get these guys who travel around the country and even travel internationally. These guys are the biggest students going. Like guys who do this full time, who train people how to shoot and do higher end classes. These guys are above all students. I mean, it's not unusual for those guys to be taking a class, 6-8 times a year. Okay, so I think that kind of puts it in perspective, how serious they take it. I'm not able to do it that often, but I take every opportunity I can to go train with a good instructor. And as far as my own shooting, dry fire is your friend. Okay, dry fire is your friend. There's a lot of good resources out there. I've written myself about, good routines for dry fire. It costs you nothing. All you need is a safe place in your house, and you need to be safe. 90% of the skill set you can train with dry fire. It depends. For me, I may only get to the range once every couple of weeks, depending on what's going on. If I'm shooting matches and all of that, I'll be going at least once a week. Usually I'll shoot between 200 to 300 rounds when I go. But the dry fire, I'm doing that 3 or 4 nights a week at least. And it doesn't have to be extensive. Your 20-minute session, you're getting those repetitions in.
Yeah, I've even moved to an airsoft gun that was as close to a Glock 19 as possible so that I could have something more that gave me a more realistic feeling than constantly having to rack the slide.
Yeah, that's a great option as well.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. But anyway, yeah, I find that to be helpful. Have you found other ways of practicing and doing dry fire that makes it a little more exciting and a little more fun for people? There's a lot of things on the market now that can, like, there's these, they make basically a Glock 17 size pistol, I believe, that you can even shoot at the targets that will illuminate, or you can get the laser device and put it in your real gun and it'll illuminate on the little bullseye. So you can do those things. I think you can even buy cans that when you hit them with the laser, they actually bounce and fly off and this kind of stuff. So you can make it more interactive. I think realistically, you're going to get to the point where you just have to accept the fact that dry fire can be a bit boring, but it comes down to, do you want to get those reps in? Right.
Do you want to get the repetitions in to make handling that weapon second nature? And if you do, you're going to budget the time to do it.
Yeah. That's a good point. To go back to trainers for a minute, how do you judge other trainers? And I hear this question often from people of how to find a trainer and then to how to even figure out if they're good. Do you have any tips on how people can judge a trainer they're looking at to take a class from potentially?
Yeah. And, it's hard. It is hard because, there's no regulation, obviously,
Right.
in the firearms world as to, what credentials you have. There are a lot of guys out there who, even guys who make a reputation for themselves, who honestly, they don't know what they're doing, and they're teaching all kinds of, weird doctrine. So it is very difficult. There's one thing you can look at is the other activity they've been involved in. And what I mean by that, not necessarily their background. I know plenty of guys who have a military or law enforcement background and they're horrible trainers.
Yeah.
And I know guys who are just civilian backgrounds who are very good trainers. So what else do they do? What other activities do they do? Maybe they contribute to the firearms world in some other way. Are they doing whatever podcasts? Are they writing? That sort of thing. Obviously, word of mouth. But when you get somebody who doesn't know what to look for, they might go and just like somebody and say, "Oh, he was great," or "She was great." I can tell you that most of the big players are really solid, most of them, because for them, it's also a business, and you don't start a business unless you're passionate about it, So I'm pleased to say that most of the big names out there are very squared away people, very good teachers. The issue is, the average person who wants to get their concealed carry permit or whatever it may be is realistically not going to go take a 2 or 3 day class and have to travel for it and spend that kind of money for it. So they're going to be looking for somebody in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And, most places there are really solid firearms trainers. One thing you could look at is obviously, you have the NRA certified trainers. You can look them up in your area, that sort of thing. NRA does a great service with that, but there's plenty of people who are NRA certified who are not worth your time, right? Yeah, exactly. So one thing you could do, look at the local shooting ranges. Do they provide something? Because hopefully at least there's some semblance of they're providing a decent service. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of looking around. If you have the opportunity to go with one of the big names and, there's a ton of information out on all of these guys online, I encourage people to do so. But if you need to go with someone regional, try to look into what else they do. If they seem sound as far as what they're teaching. When somebody comes out and says, "Oh, I have something new," that's your first indication that you should be skeptical. Because honestly, what we're teaching, things change, but they change slowly. If somebody is telling you they have a whole new method of doing things, that's probably an indication that's not who you want to be working with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So going beyond handguns, what other supporting gear do you carry? I mean, most of us refer to this as our EDC gear. What do you recommend?
Yeah, again, very personal, what we're going to carry. I like to see people carrying a handgun and at least one reload.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you will get people who say, "Oh, you're never going to reload." And the truth is, actually, the vast, vast majority of defensive gun uses, there is no reload. Mm-hmm. That is a fact. Okay. So, if you carry a gun with pretty decent capacity in it and you feel comfortable with no reload, no problem. I like to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Right. Yeah. That's my approach to everything. Beyond that, if you're a prepper and you don't carry a knife every day, you're wrong.
Mm.
It's that simple. Right. Mm-hmm. A knife. Now, for me, as a defensive tool, it's secondary.
Right.
As that, very secondary. Okay, I don't put a whole lot of thought into that. I do keep it accessible to my non-gun hand, my non-dominant hand, in case I needed it in that capacity. But for me, it's an essential rescue tool.
Mm-hmm.
I got stuck in a seatbelt when I was 12 years old.
Mm.
Nobody in the car had a knife. My younger brother actually ran into a store and borrowed a box cutter from the clerk, and he came and cut me out. And I was 12 years old when it happened, and that was the last day in my life that I ever walked out of the house without a cutting tool on my person.
Mm.
And realistically, I think what you would use that blade for more realistically than having to shank some fool, right, would be, having to cut a loved one out of a car that's filling with water,
right,
or a car that's on fire, in the wake of a wreck. And if you don't carry a knife, you're wrong. It doesn't have to be a knife. It could be a multi-tool with a blade on it, maybe, but you need to carry a cutting tool. The other thing that I would certainly recommend, and we see the industry moving to this, is carrying medical gear. And you've probably seen this, I would think, as this has evolved. One of the benefits of our nation, unfortunately, being at war for as long as it has is, we get advancements in this stuff that trickle down into civilian population, one of which is tourniquets save lives.
Yeah.
Carry a tourniquet, know how to apply it. And if you have the pocket room, carry a hemostatic agent as well. That's blood clotting gauze or a sponge or something of that sort. And certainly learn how to use it. There's all kinds of great training resources out there for that. Back to your 80-20 principle, I would dare say that you're far more likely to use that in your lifetime than you are to even use your handgun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a huge proponent of getting basic emergency medical training and really keeping up with it, because you're so right. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen in the evolution of the community. It was interesting watching as the war went on and everything else, just how discombobulated tactical gear was, and kind of just, it really hadn't advanced since the Vietnam era. And then I guess the only upside I can see really from any of these long protracted wars we've been in, whether they want to call them a war or not, is the incredible advances in personal emergency medical gear and tactical gear. It has come so far, so fast. And I think people who are new to the community just see what we have now. But man, it is so much better than it used to be 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's no question about it. There's no question about it. And it's a big lifesaver. I mean, that's been proven, it's in particular the tourniquet. If you carry nothing else, if you carry a tourniquet, okay, it's been proven over and over again. A lot of people's, anything that's caused from the environment, the biggest killer in the, and again, not just, gunfights, accidents, car accidents, anything like that, hemorrhaging through an appendage is huge. That is a huge percentage of the statistics of people who die, whether it's on a battlefield or, in a car wreck or anything like that. And being able to tie off that bleeding to keep somebody alive long enough to make it to an emergency room, that's huge. So, I'm totally on board with that. Carry a tourniquet at least, and carry a light, right? As far as the lights go, I kind of deviate a bit from the norm among, the real hardcore gun community guys who carry their 900 lumen Surefire lights, etc. I always carry a light.
Yeah.
But if you look at the nature of things that actually happen in the civilian world, you are hard pressed to ever find the use of a light in conjunction with the handgun. It's exceedingly rare. So I'm not saying don't carry it. I always carry a light. But realistically, the light is more a tool of searching a dark environment, right? And that can factor in, hey, who is that? I'm in a dark parking lot. I can't see who they are. Shine a bright light in their face and identify them. I don't think the average concealed carrier needs to get too carried away in all the night fighting stuff. There's a whole industry that caters to that. Do it if you want to. It's great stuff. But, for the average concealed carrier, if we want to look at statistics, they're almost nil as far as lights being used in conjunction with the handgun, but still carry a light. I mean, if nothing else, how many times have you dropped your keys under your car in a dark parking lot and you need the light?
Yeah.
So to me, it's a no-brainer. If you're prepared, carry a light on your person. The last thing I'd throw out there is a less lethal weapon. I'm a believer. And again, those guys who walk around with beards and sleeve tats, I have nothing wrong with that, but they carry their 900 lumen light. They carry no less lethal option. And if you want to talk about statistics, over 80% of assaults that are committed every year are less lethal in nature. In other words, it's a hands-on assault. If you go to lethal force, you are going to be facing some serious consequences. Less lethal tool is something to look into. And I think any kind of grid down scenario, the idea that that's going to go away, I don't think that's the case at all. You still may encounter people who are aggressive, but don't warrant shooting in the face. And I think that's a tool people should look at, whether that's pepper spray or some kind of impact weapon that you want to train with. It's good to have. I wouldn't say it's, mandatory. I definitely prioritize maybe your medical and your gun over that, but I would consider it.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I had an incident recently where, fortunately, the situation didn't end up in physical contact hostility, but it looked like it was going to go there. And all I kept thinking was, man, I walked out of the house and the only two things I have at my disposal to de-escalate this, one of them is a permanent solution and the other one is my mouth. And I got nothing in between those two. And there is a wide gulf between those situations. And the situation definitely did not warrant me shooting the guy in the face. I really, really, really wanted to, but it didn't warrant that. So that makes perfect sense. What do you personally use for your less than lethal option?
I use a device called it's made by the ASP company. I don't know if it's usually pronounced ASP or ASP. I hear it referred to as ASP. It is called the Key Defender. So it's a little Kubotan-like device, and I like that because it also gives me then the impact weapon ability, and it has pepper spray in it.
Oh, okay.
The downside to it is it does not give you the range as a larger dedicated pepper spray canister does. But I like it as a cross between those two options. It's also a great device because it tucks in your waistband and carries your keys and never falls out. I like it for that reason, too. That's what I personally use. I think realistically, most people are not going to carry a larger container of spray. So most people are going to carry something small on their keys. That's the one I like. The other one I really like is it was made by Saber Red called the Spitfire. Unfortunately, I think they stopped production of it. At least that's what I've heard. If you can find one, grab one. It's very tiny and it has fairly good range for how small it is. And it's very intuitive to deploy.
Very cool. So as far as, I kind of hinted at it a minute ago, as far as like your mouth is one of your tools. Do you teach any de-escalation techniques like verbal judo or anything else? Can you walk us into that?
Absolutely. And and I've written extensively about it on some of the various firearms venues that I write for. That's huge. That's huge. The de-escalation, obviously your situational awareness to avoid trouble before it's upon you to begin with. But de-escalation is a big part of that. And, it's a whole topic unto itself. Hard to go into it here, but even if you don't take specific training for it, there's all kinds of great resources out there about how to de-escalate. And really the art there is to be, and it's hard to believe, but, criminals actually have a code of honor too. They don't like to be insulted. And there are ways to give a bad actor a means to bow out without instigating a fight. That might be more relevant to your typical barroom confrontation. But there's ways to also handle criminals encroaching on you, to use verbal judo on that too, to hopefully de-escalate before you had to escalate to any level of physical force.
Oh, well, very cool. We'll be sure to link to some of your articles on the topic so people can dive deeper into that. And speaking of which, listeners are hearing this episode and they're like, this Salvatore guy, he's my brand of wacky. How do they keep up with your extensive writing and find out more about you and maybe even train with you?
The best place is my own blog. It's reflexhandgun.com. So www.reflexhandgun.com. Just like it sounds. So I usually post an article every week, and your audience probably will like it because it's not just about handgun stuff. That's the consistent theme, obviously. A lot of different self-defense things, also all kinds of political pontification about Second Amendment issues and that sort of thing.
Oh, cool.
I also keep a page out there, though, to my professional writing, to the bigger firearms sites.
Oh, cool. So you write for other sites as well, too, and you link to that from your website. Yep. Very cool. So give me the address one more time.
Yep. So that is www.reflexhandgun.com.
Awesome. Well, Salvatore, thank you so much for being on today. We really appreciate it and everything that you've shared with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and best of wishes to the prepper community out there. They're my people for sure, and I hope to see more of the Strictly Firearms folks come over to our side as well.
Yeah, definitely. Show notes, links to Salvatore, and other resources from this episode can be found by going to intherabbithole.com/E235. Support the show and get ITRH Roving Horde Armada members-only benefits. Like what? Like twice monthly virtual hangs, access to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group, the on-demand bug-out bag class, and that's just to name a few things. Go to itrh.net. Twice a month, members get on a private, secure video virtual hang and chat about guns, mead, food storage, guns, more guns, and whatever's on their mind. Go to itrh.net to read more about membership benefits. Again, that's itrh.net to find out more about the exclusive ITRH Roving Horde Armada members-only benefits. With that, we wrap up episode number 235. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.